Janie Brown tells us that preparing for death is a radical act of love for ourselves and for our loved ones who will live on after we are gone. At the end of life, when the body loses its function, the heart continues to have an endless capacity to express and receive love. Even without a healthy body, we continue to have a worthy function to give and to receive love. By opening our hearts in life and death, those we hold close will be nourished by our love long after we are gone. There is much courage and gratitude in our willingness to open ourselves to this conversation, which many families choose not to have, for it requires the free will to be vulnerable. Family members often worry that engaging in talking about death with loved ones might be perceived as an act of betrayal or loss of hope. But this fear often later becomes a regret, and the dying want to be in the protection of their loved ones and safe from the pain of parting, even if they avoid talking about it. There is a connection between how you view death and our level of compassion, critical thinking, and autonomy. Come learn more about yourself. Welcome to my new video essay series in which we explore the intersection of death, medicine, and ethics. I'm Octavian, your on-call ethical consultant, and this new series will help you learn more about yourself, the medical system, and pressing dilemmas in the field. In this episode, we discuss the classical definition of death and the cultural and historical perceptions of Europeans. In the following episodes, we will discuss the role of the polio epidemic in how we relate to death today, the role of the Papal Institute and the Harvard University of Medicine in redefining death, and the ethical and legal implications. Our perception of death has evolved significantly throughout history, from the practices of ancient civilizations to the influence of Christianity to the impact of technological advancement. Today, modern medical technologies allow life to be maintained even when the natural respiration is no longer possible, raising complex questions about the timing of death and the status of people in a reduced state of consciousness. Advances in the medical field, such as antibiotics, anesthesia, and organ transplants, have improved the quality of life and human longevity, but have changed the way we understand and define death. Ethical and legal issues, such as determining the time of death or managing the severely mentally disabled, requires continuous review and adjustment of social norms. Although the subject might seem remote, the inevitability of death means that the way we manage it influences our perception and definition of it.
Okay, let's go.
Throughout history, people have died. Usually people who die have relatives and friends. Relatives and friends who learn that a relative or friend has died are saddened. The sadness comes because of the severing of the connection and out of empathy and compassion for the deceased, relatives, self, and friends. At the same time, the death of a loved one reminds us of our mortality, which makes us feel vulnerable because we don't know what comes after we die. The death of a loved one also makes us ask moral questions, such as who am I and what role did I play in the life of the person who died? When we ask these questions, who am I and what role did I play in the life of the person who died, new thoughts come to us that we have never thought of before, which makes us sad and confused. And because many people die and many people who remain alive grieve about it, people have sought to empathize and remember that it's normal to grieve and to be sad and to have different thoughts. How people have shown solidarity all over the world and throughout history are different. For example, the ancient Etruscans and Egyptians built houses for the deceased and buried them alongside personal belongings, because they believed that they could influence their social capital, fertility, and finances. In Western medieval Europe, death was everywhere as well. It was expected to know how to kill and process the flesh of your livestock. Epidemics and famines wiped out entire villages without warning, and life expectancy was around 35 years. At the same time, people in the old European environment used to die in their homes with their extended family. All these customs have made them experience death more intimately than we do today. Christianity was somewhat successful in soothing social anxieties because it saw death not as a final act but as a necessary step in the journey of the soul. Family and friends who survived the deceased believed that they could help them have a smooth path to the afterlife. Until the 16th century, it was believed that the living could influence the passing of the soul of the deceased, says Berridge Kate, by taking on the responsibility of spiritual caretakers. With the help of prayers and services, the living sought to hasten the passage of the soul of the dead from the purgatory or the veils of afterlife. In the 4th century, in the saying of the Desert Fathers, there is such an account. Abba Macarius found the skull of a dead man lying in the ground, and shaking it with his palm staff, he said, "Who are you? In the name of the Lord, answer me." And the skull answered and said, "I was a priest of the heathen who dwelt in this place, and you are Abbot Macarius, the bearer of the Spirit. And in the hour in which, out of pity, you pray for those who are under condemnation, they are a little comforted." And the man said, "What is comfort?" The skull answered, "As far as the sky is from the earth, so great is the fire beneath us. So while we stand in the midst of the fire, it is not possible to look upon the face of a man, but the back of each man's head is pressed to the back of the other's head. So when you pray for us, O man of God, one can see the face of the other in part. This is comfort." Now, for a reason I will not discuss here, with the Protestant Reformation and the Renaissance movement came a wave of skepticism about the existence of the soul, leading to a retreat of death from the forefront of everyday concerns. Individuality and what you leave behind became the most important subjects. Traditional rites and prayers have been replaced by obituaries, speeches, and pardons. And don't say you haven't seen the change. The speech the priest gives and the talks afterwards have become more important than the service itself. But let's come back. As I said in the beginning, in order to grieve someone's death, someone needs to die. And how do you know that someone has died? Well, not too long ago, the definition of death was something like, death is the permanent cessation of the biological functions that sustain the body. Now, different cultures interpret cessation of biological functions differently. But in Europe, those functions are culturally closely linked to the heart and lungs. But I digress. The point is that the classical definition of death worked well for several thousand years until it was replaced by a new definition, which we will discuss later. But even so, the classical definition of death was sufficient but not perfect. You see, it stood on a circular logic, or flawed logic. That is, we knew that fluids such as blood were vital because they stopped circulating when the person or animal was dead. And how do we know that the person or animal was dead? By the fact that the blood stopped flowing. And why did the blood stop flowing? Because the person had died. And why did it die? Because the blood stopped flowing, and so on until the second coming. Circular arguments are those in which the conclusion is repeated within the argument or premise, without providing new evidence or support. And in real life, argument fallacies create real problems, such as people sometimes waking up in the morgue at their funeral or worse. As a solution to the problem of argumentation, around the world we have numerous examples of rituals such as the wake, which also aim to provide a guarantee that the deceased really died. In other words, because people didn't have machines that could confirm 100% that the person had died, they waited 1 to 3 days to see if they didn't wake up. Even so, with today's machines, there are still misdiagnosed people who end up in the news that they woke up at the morgue. But our story doesn't stop here. In the 19th century, following the Industrial Revolution, recolonization, and a pandemic, the classical definition of death was about to be changed. But until then, please subscribe and please be happy.